people are still getting the rest of their food, I just wanted to remind everybody, please sign in. If you haven't done so, do it on the way out. You don't have to leave me your email. You don't have to sign up for the list. I'd like you to. But we just need the numbers for our metrics, which is the least sexy thing I could say. I'm Sarah Horber. I'm the Vice President of the Animal Law Society. We're here today in conjunction with the Criminal Law Society. Thank you all for being here. We have a few upcoming events. The Poe and Happy Hours tomorrow at the Poe Museum. The Public Interest Law Association is hosting that. They're paying for the first 75 people with Richmond Law IDs, plus their plus ones. That's included in the 75. Richardson's Rescue will be there with adoptable kittens, and we'd encourage you to bring some cash to donate to them or supplies. We have a Facebook event. If you'd like to know more information or come talk to one of us, there's some costume contests, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Last spooky, unhappy hour of the season. On November 14th, Criminal Law Society is hosting, Richmond Women's Law and TAB are hosting Women in Criminal Law panel at 12 p.m. in the Moot Court, and they're serving lunch. Additionally, this is the first in a two-part series about working dogs. So next semester, we're going to have a discussion about service dogs in the Americans with Disabilities Act. So today's event comes in two parts. First, we're going to have a discussion about the constitutionality of dog sniffs and where we are in that whole situation right now with criminal procedure. Second, we're going to have a talk and demonstration from the Richmond Police Department's Canine Unit so we can learn about dog sniffs from their perspective and their everyday practical use. Professor Corinna Lain is the S.D. Roberts and Sandra Moore Professor of Law here at Richmond Law, and she teaches ethics, criminal procedure, and the death penalty, as well as, I believe, children in law. Only once, just kidding. She is an American Law Institute member. She's received the U of R Distinguished Educator Award, and she's a former Commonwealth's attorney in Henrico and an Army veteran. Professor Paul Crane is an assistant professor of law here at Richmond Law. He teaches criminal law and procedure, and additionally he teaches a one-of-a-kind course about the law of sexual violence. Before coming here, he was a federal prosecutor, and at one point he clerked for Justice John Roberts, according to the website. I hope that's true. Both of these professors got their JDs from UVA, and from experience, both are exceptional educators, so it's a privilege to have them speak today on this topic. So now I'm going to hand it over to them to talk about dog sniffs.
We were just going to talk sitting down, but I might just scoot this back so that you guys can see us to the extent you want to. How's that? Better? Okay. I think originally we thought of this, or it was thought of for us as a debate, and we kind of looked at each other and said, we don't really have anything to debate about, but we could discuss. And so we just thought we'd have a discussion and take questions with you. There's really three big issues, I guess. 4 cases, 3 big issues for dog searches, and I'll take the first 2 and then kind of hand it over, and then we can discuss and you guys can ask questions. And so I'll just go ahead and get started. The first case that the Supreme Court took was a case called United States versus Place, and it's from 1983. And in that particular case, it's a really big case. Actually, in criminal procedure today, I'm going to be talking about it for some other reason. But it's a really big case, and in that particular case, the police had a piece of luggage that the defendant was flying from, I think it was Miami to New York, and they had reason to believe this was a drug courier. So they took the piece of luggage and had a dog sniff it, and the dog hit on the piece of luggage. So then they kept the piece of luggage, got a warrant to search it, open it up, and it's 1,100 grams of cocaine, so, you know, it was a big hit. But the thing is that they didn't have probable cause. They had a suspicion that the person was a drug courier, so they didn't have probable cause before the dog hit on the suitcase to actually search it. They had a suspicion, not probable cause. When the dog actually hits on the suitcase, now they've got probable cause, then they can get the warrant, which is what they did. But at the beginning, they didn't have probable cause, and so it mattered whether or not the dog sniffing, doing a sniff of the suitcase, was actually a search. Because if it was a search, then it needed to be supported by probable cause, and everyone was conceding they didn't yet have probable cause. So was it a search or wasn't it a search? That's the question that the court decided in United States versus Place. And the court said that it's not a search. That a dog sniffing and hitting on a suitcase is not a search. And the court said it's not a search because none of the contents of the suitcase, the personal contents, are known. They're not strewn about. They're not shared. The only thing that is known about it is that the suitcase contains contraband. And so the court said there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in contraband. If you don't want the dog hitting on your suitcase, then don't have contraband in the suitcase, the court said. And so the court says, look, a dog sniff is a very particular kind of thing. It's not really a search, it's a sui generis, the court said. It only finds one piece of information. And I see we have our friend here, and we brought Frankie. Frankie is the dog in Hardina's, not this dog, obviously, but we did our best. But anyway, so the court says in Place that a dog sniff is not a search. What's the result of that? The result of that, and it's really kind of fun to, I went back and just sort of looked at the oral arguments in Place. And two things interesting about that. Number one, the argument over the dog sniff was actually not an argument that the defendant was making. And so you see Brennan in dissent saying, we reached out, this wasn't briefed, why are we deciding this? Why? Because the court was ready to decide it, basically. But you also see the justices saying, gosh, if it's not a search, we're really worried about the police being able to walk up with the dog and do anything, right? Because it's not a search, so they don't need probable cause. They don't have to be reasonable. They can be unreasonable. They can be anything they want. That's Place. That's the first decision. The second decision comes after that. It's 2005, so it's quite a ways after that. And the case is Illinois versus Cabales or Caballes, the two L's there. And in that particular case, it was a traffic stop. So the guy gets stopped for a traffic infraction, and the police are dealing with him about that. And it can take a while to process the ticket. And so they're running his license and all of that sort of thing. Can I see your registration? In the meantime, they have a feeling that this person probably has drugs. It might be a drug courier. And they say, can I search your car? And he says no. And they're like, boy, I wanted to get in your car before, but now I really want to get in the car. So what they do is they call a drug canine unit to come up to the car while they're processing the ticket, which they're writing very slowly, so that they are still processing it when the dog, the canine, shows up. And so the dog hits on the car, and once again, lo and behold, lots and lots and lots of drugs. And so the question there, the state was saying, look, drug sniff, you said, is not a search. That's United States versus Place. And so we weren't extending the time of the stop. This is the amount, the police had legitimately stopped this car for a traffic violation, was still processing the traffic violation. And so whatever happens while that car happens to be parked alongside the road, one never knows. A dog could be out on a walk, dog walks, they do that. So, the state is like, look, the car was parked there, a dog showed up, a dog hit, this is not a search, we're good. The defendant was saying, we're not so good. First of all, the defendant's not so good, period. But he says, look, he's like, I want to play with Frankie. Oh, or do other things. So the defendant there says, yeah, but you stopped me for a traffic infraction. And when you do a stop, it has to be limited to the justification for the stop in the first place. You stop me for traffic, you're stuck with traffic. And when you brought the dog in, you extended the scope of the stop. The Supreme Court sides with the government there and says, yeah, we said a dog sniff is not a search, and so you happen to be stopped, and as long as the police don't hold your car extra, as long as they are still in the process of processing your ticket, the dog hit on your car, that's just too bad. So that's the first two cases, and it's luggage and a car. And then the question was, does anything change when you get to a house? And with the house came some new law, or right before, and so everything kind of changed. I'll turn it over to Professor Corinna.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank everyone for being here. I know, come for the dog, stay for the dog, so I'll move this. Right, come for the donut, stay for the dog.
Yeah.
Stay for another donut. So I'll try to go through these a little quickly so you guys can get to the main event. As I also told one of my classes earlier, either Professor Lain or I has a controlled substance on us, so we're going to see if there's going to be an alert. That's not true. That's right. Check your bag. So the case that then sort of happened in the next line was Florida versus Jardinez. And it involved the home, doing a dog search of the home, right? So as Professor Lain explained, sort of search of luggage and airports, right? And we can all, have had experiences seeing the sniffing dogs at train stations and airports, and no one's saying I need to have probable cause to do this, or even permission, right? And car stops, very frequent as well. And both of those situations says, okay, is there something different about the home? And so what happened there, well, most relevantly, dog was named Frankie. And the police suspected that there was being controlled substances either manufactured or distributed out of a particular home in Florida. Being Florida, that was right. And then the police walked. I heard an awe. The police went to the home, brought a canine, drug sniffing dog, walked on the pathway, walked to the front door, stood on the porch. The dog did part of its normal procedure, something called bracketing, going back and forth, and then alerted to there being positive what turned out to be marijuana. And from that, the police then said, that gives us probable cause. We'll go get a warrant, go get one, come back, find all sorts of controlled substances, including large amounts of marijuana inside the house. And then what the defendant ended up challenging on was that bringing the dog to the front porch was both a Fourth Amendment event and one that violated the Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unreasonable search and seizures in your home. And so you might think, looking at Place and Caballes, well, dog sniff isn't going to reveal anything that you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in. It's on all these other circumstances we said it's okay. And at least to some degree of surprise, and just more importantly, in a different way, court says in a 5-4, no, that is not okay for the police to do. That violates the Fourth Amendment. And perhaps even more surprising, if you haven't taken Professor Lane's criminal investigation class, written by Justice Scalia, joined by Justice Thomas, and 3 others. And so, less surprising. Kagan, Sotomayor, and Ginsburg. Right. That was the 5. And so here's what they say. First of all, home first among equals. Nothing special about the home. Also, they rely, at least the majority opinion, on a trespass property right theory that had sort of first gained traction a year prior in a separate case called United States versus Jones. I won't get too involved in what that is, but basically says when determining whether or not you have sort of your Fourth Amendment interests, we're also going to look at your not just a reasonable expectation of privacy, but any sort of property rights you might have. And there, the police slapping a GPS on a car was a Fourth Amendment event. And they say, well, walking up to your home, the police with their canine it was a trespass, it was extending beyond the implied license. So if you go read this opinion, you're going to go read a lot of stuff about property law. So I'm warning you in advance. And they say, well, yeah, people can come up to the front door, and knock on it. Police can even do that themselves. Trick-or-treaters, Girl Scouts, solicitors, that's fine. But what your normal homeowner has not given permission is for police with a canine, who is a drug detecting dog, to come and do a smell on your front porch. That is not something that in your, who are the people that you reasonably have given permission ahead of time to come onto your front porch? It is not those set of circumstances. And because of that, the owner of the home had a property right that was transgressed, and the police did not have sufficient justification to do that. There's a concurrence by 3 of the justices that say, okay, we agree with that. Also, this violates reasonable expectations of privacy. This would be the equivalent of taking super powerful binoculars and peering into your window from the porch. Yes, you might have the right to stand on the porch. It might not be a problem for you to be standing on the porch, but once you pick up those super strong binoculars and try to look into the house, that is a Fourth Amendment event that requires some justification by the police. And then you have 4 dissenters that are saying, dog sniffs are fine, and it's okay for the police to be standing on your porch. End of case. Really simple. So what that means going forward is the use of drug sniffing dogs around the home. The police are going to need to have more justification before doing something like that. But it does not affect cars, car stops, airports, planes, trains, automobiles, because there aren't these property rights that you have when it comes to like your home. The 4th case, which is also another Florida case decided the same year, it's called Florida versus Harris, and that involved a dog named Aldo. And what the main issue there was, when a police officer uses a canine, and then that evidence is later tried to be admitted and the defense trying to file a motion to suppress, what does it mean to show that there was probable cause based on the dog sniff? What does the government have to be required to introduce as evidence that this is reliable, that the drug sniff and the alert was reliable? It's sort of the equivalent of like a speed gun. Like you have to go show that it's been calibrated and all this sort of information. And what the Florida Supreme Court has said is anytime police want to rely on a dog alert, they have to introduce a ton of information, all its training, all its certification, and information about every false alert it has previously given. And the U.S. Supreme Court 9-0 says, whoa, that is way too much. Probable cause is a much more flexible, open standard. Government, you can introduce that evidence to make it seem stronger. Defense, if you want to challenge it, you can cross-examine and try to get previous records and based on that. But we're not going to have this rigid rule that says, government, you have to come forward with all this information anytime you want to use a dog sniff as the basis for probable cause, which, consistent with other probable cause rulings, flexible, open-ended, case-by-case, let the parties sort of sort through it, very consistent with that, which is why it was 9-0.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I would just, tracked the local cases, so I had seen one out of the 4th Circuit following Florida versus Harris. I thought I'll just, add with that. Because here's the deal, is that the reason you saw a challenge come up on the dog hit in Florida versus Harris is because the success rate matters, right? And so you might have these dog hits that are not turning up drugs, and so the question is, okay, if they have a really low, quote, success rate, does it still go into probable cause? Can you still get probable cause? So in the wake of Florida versus Harris, there's this case that came out of the 4th Circuit, United States versus Green. The dog success rate, and I think we should talk about what that means, but the dog success rate is 26%. So 1 in 4 times that the dog hits on the car or whatever, there's actually drugs there. 3/4 of the time, well, I guess 26%, I'm just rounding to 25, but 3/4 of the times there's nothing there. And so the 4th Circuit says, yeah, but the court said It doesn't matter what that you might have a really low success rate. And I think the reasons why it doesn't matter are actually pretty important. Because in Florida versus Harris, the court says, you know, what we're gonna look at is what the dog did during the certification process. You know, because some dogs are better during the certification process than out of the street, just like, you know, some dogs are academic dogs. They're better in the ivory tower, you know, and some dogs are better out on the street, actually practicing, right? And so this is a very different type of thing. And the court says, look, when a dog has a low success rate out on the street, it doesn't mean that it's a bad dog. And I don't mean like bad dog. I just mean, you know, like it doesn't mean that it's not good at what it does. Because because when a dog hits on something, they're hitting on the smell. They're not actually saying there's drugs in there. What they're saying is, I smell drugs in there. And so you could smell drugs on someone because they used to have drugs, but they just took them, sorry. Or, you know, somebody was in their car, or they used to have stuff in their car, or whatever. So the court says it's less important what the success rate is out on the field. What's important is what happened during the certification process. And in both of these cases, the certification, like the dogs were A+ dogs in school. They were just less than that out on the street. That's all I got.
Go.
I was gonna say, and then the Ninth Circuit actually, subsequent to this, said, yeah, okay, we get the Supreme Court's decision in Harris, but if the government doesn't share the low success rate, it's a Brady violation. That's the Ninth Circuit though, so you know, they're kind of out on their own sometimes.
Yeah, and just one thing I'd add, which is, I'm sure, apparent to you all, is these cases are only going to be coming up and generated when something was in fact found, right? If there was nothing there, it's not even getting its way into the system. And so the question is not usually about, was the dog successful in this case? Because the answer is yes, that's why we're here. It's how do we think about a mixed success rate previously, when therefore does that trigger probable cause, does that cross the threshold of probable cause for the police to then say, okay, you've alerted, now that gives us the ability to do X, Y, or Z.
I think we were the filler. I think the food was the main attraction. We're the little filler, and then it's really the dogs. But,
Yeah, no,
right?
we were just an excuse for the dogs
Yeah,
to go
we
back.
were, we really were, and we got a free lunch. Do you all have questions or comments? How does, yeah?
I just have a question. Would it make a difference if the dog indicates that there's like cocaine, but there's actually like a different drug? Like they don't find the original
Yeah.
signals for? Like,
So my understanding of the dogs is that they are trained, and you guys might be, really good about this too. But okay, that's a great segue. That was it. We're done. Do you want us to move?
No, I can move here forever.
Do you want me to introduce you guys really quick?
Sure.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Brooke. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Criminal Law Society president. Thanks for coming. This is Sergeant Stuart Hanna and Officer Meredith Mullins. They're from the K-9 unit at the Richmond City Police Department, and we're so lucky to have them here today because today is a recertification day, so we pulled them away from that so they could be here to do a demonstration and to talk about how the dogs are trained. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Oh, and by the way, I cannot introduce the dogs. His dog is Aries. He's in the car right now, and this dog is Kaya. And I actually met a case with Kaya this summer, and she was great. So was Meredith.
So I guess talking about the main thing to understand with the dogs is just like how you wouldn't want me to write up a motion to suppress, or the dog to write up a motion to suppress. Like we're not really qualified to say what that dog is smelling. Like it's hard for people to understand the way odor works because we just don't see it. I mean, just on your person right now, you're emitting little bits of skin particles just everywhere in the area. When you think about it, it's a little nasty, but everything is giving off odor. It's breaking down. So, piggybacking off so let's say the dog can't say you smell marijuana versus cocaine. We're reading the alert, but dog's not wrong when somebody just left the house after smoking marijuana and happened to get stopped by the police. That odor is all in their clothes. It sticks around longer than just, for 2 minutes sometimes, and different odors, different strengths. So something in your pocket that's been sitting there for 2 hours, that odor is just sitting there and it's marinating, it's kind of getting out, versus something that's only been in your pocket for 2 minutes, the odor hasn't had enough time to kind of get out. So,
She's trying to get you.
yeah, she could probably,
So he has marijuana in his pocket right
in
now.
fact,
So if he used to take it out, put it out in the car, and come back in a half hour without the marijuana in his pocket, she still can smell that. The odor's still gonna be there. So the way I try to take court, try to make like a jury or something, people understand. It's like when you cook bacon in your house.
They're all like,
And they're all day long. Not the bacon, bacon's gone. Eating the bacon, the odor's there all day long. So it's kind of like how I try to explain to people on court to understand. But, and as far as their unsuccessful rate, we only determine that during certification. So they're 100% certification. If they're not, they don't work the street. So what happens in the street, like, if they alert to somebody and there's nothing there was either something there or they were around at some point. There's never a false alert.
yeah. For example, so let's say you have a drug dealer who's been doing narcotic transactions all day. He sells out of all his drugs. So, but he's been handling drugs all day and drug money all day. So sometimes the dog may hit on this big stack of money that has just narcotic odor all in his pocket. So, and we proof our dogs off of things like that. For example, plastic bags, uncirculated currency, things like that. We do a good job of making sure that our dogs are alerting to the odor. And just distractions in general. I took my dog out when he was new, and I'm running to people outside of a store, and there's chicken bones all on the ground. So imagine trying to get a 1.5-year-old dog to focus when there's chicken bones all on the ground. So what did I do? And he worked through it, and ultimately he found the right source what people had in their pocket. It took some spinning and refocusing, but he did it. What did I do next time in training? I had chicken wings a couple nights before. I brought him to training, and we put him out, and made sure he's working through it. So it's kind of a good dog handler is going to recognize when their dogs say like have a distraction or a weak point or something like that and work through it. Like if Kaya had problems with, loud noises or something like that while Meredith was running the car, we might be in the background yelling, making noises, like doing stuff like that while she's trying to run to make sure her dog is, because when you go out in the middle of Gilpin Court and you're running somebody, there's 4 to 10 people talking smack, oh, your dog's not doing anything, and then you yelling, all types of stuff. It's ridiculous. So that's something we work a lot on training to kind of prove ourselves for the street, because we don't want to put, just from our standpoint and the people who train with us, it's a training group, so, Henrico, Chesterfield, some of those small jurisdictions all train with us. We don't want to be part of the debate one day for bad case law. So we do our best to make sure our dogs are on their game.
And then you are as well.
Yeah, and it could be, in training, like, you're gonna get called out if you're doing something, as a handler that you shouldn't, and I wouldn't expect anything less, even though I'm the sergeant of the unit, if I'm, going through school, if I'm doing something, boneheaded, they're gonna yell at me and I'm gonna fix it. Because, like I said, we don't want to be on that other side of that bad case law because there's, you just don't want to be. You're talking about probable cause. We don't want our dogs to be alerting on things that aren't there. The best way to.
I have a two-part question. How do you train them to recognize certain smells, narcotics specifically, and then CBD oil being legalized in Virginia recently? Do you think that's going to potentially create false positive alerts? And
I have to look at the
depends-
CBD oil. Yeah, we might have to talk to some people about that.
That question specifically, She, we went partially to the post office, and she alerted to bananas, I can't pronounce what they are, but these little fruits that contain that compound, and so they're gonna alert to it.
So as far as the odor, so when we're picking out dogs, we want that 90th percentile dog that there's different drives dogs have. Meredith has a lot more experience than me. I've been on the canine unit for a year now. Before that, I was in narcotics, kind of some street level unit. So I dealt with the dogs on the other end more in my career as far as calling them out. Meredith's been canines 7 years now, and is a trainer with our organization, Virginia Police Work Dog Association. But when we're training the dogs, we're picking out dogs that are, quite frankly, wouldn't make good pets because they're so crazy. They want to work. There are different drives the dogs have. Hunt drive is the primary one that we're looking for in the dogs, for our purposes as far as narcotics. But like my dog, if you try to have him inside as a pet, he would drive you crazy. Your house would just go up. You know, there's a reason he stays outside in the kennel when he's not working because he's, they're at that level where they just have to do something. So we kind of harness that energy, and they have such high drives to hunt and play that we'll take scented towels. So we start with marijuana. We'll have a big bucket of marijuana, and we'll roll up towels, we'll put in the bucket, the towel absorb the marijuana. And from then, it's essentially you're playing with the dog, with the towel. He learns when I get playtime when I find this odor, and you're just building from there. And then it starts really simple.
Starts with hunt first, yeah. Throw the towel for them, just like it's actually been right dog, and they grab it, and you go with it, and you make it. It's a fun game for them.
When you read the alert, I heard someone talk about that. Can you tell, based on their level of excitement or some sort of indication, what type of drug it will be? And do you have to put that in a probable cause, or is it just like
No,
read the alert?
they alert the same to all five. She for some reason licks when people have heroin.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially with that dog stuff now, but she for some reason.
So you might, as a handler, know your own dog.
Yeah, but I would never say, you know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
just something I noticed, but that's not her. I would never, if she just walked up to him and licked him, I wouldn't call her, you know, because he may have just had too much.
You learn your dog, so you learn the difference between general interest and so the dogs, you want to pick up. Yeah. So you see,
So she's excited.
it's in
she
my
goes
mind.
behind that, she's going to have
she's not
a
even,
toy.
it's marijuana, so it's one of the easier odors, but she already is getting a whiff of it.
Yeah, so their olfactory systems are 1 million times stronger than ours.
Yeah, so and kind of the way the dogs smell, it's been described before to me, and I like this way of describing it. Like if you walked in the house and somebody had made chili, you may walk in the house, oh, it's good, chili, it smells good. The dog can go in there and go, it has 3 different types of beans in it. You use ground beef and sausage in your chili and onions and all other spices, and it can just filter all that. So
yeah, it's called scent discrimination. They can smell every single thing in the chili separately, or we just walk in and we smell chili.
I was just going to ask, my understanding was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that different dogs, that you wouldn't have a dog trained in narcotics and explosives.
No.
Like they've got, it's within categories, and that the way they hit, so like your explosive dog will never hit on a scent by scratching, because you could like set off something.
Yeah.
But that if you had a body cavity dog or something like that, you might have that sort of hit. Am I right?
We never
Just go to
release
Andy's.
a positive response dog, which is bite scratch, on people ever. Vehicles or buildings or parcels, maybe. We don't have any at all, we just have passive dogs. So they'll alert, and their response to their alerts to sit.
Yeah.
And Kaya's trained in drugs and guns, right?
Nope, she's
Oh,
just.
she's not?
yeah.
Okay.
So these dogs can only be trained, like they could be a patrol dog, they could, track people or whatever. But since she's a probable cause dog, you can legally possess a gun.
Right.
So it's
you can't put it on everyone who has a gun.
Yeah. So.
So I know in Pennsylvania they have their, one of their drug dogs is also trained to attack. Is she trained to attack as
No,
well?
she's just a drug dog.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between, like, maybe you guys, I don't know if you have search dogs, I don't know if you have attack dogs, I don't know if you have.
We have what, 3 narcotics dogs right now? No, 4.
Yeah, so you're talking about dual purpose dogs, so,
Dual-purpose dogs.
yeah, control dogs are with the traditional fighting dog, they have tracking, going to building searches, they're trained to bite and hold. So,
And just a quick note on that, they're not ever called cat dogs.
Sorry, yeah.
No, they apprehend. So.
they don't have dogs, they only have one thing. So, if they're trained to bite and hold, they're trained to target non-lethal areas of the body. There's tons of other case law all related to that. So those are the patrol dogs. We don't have any patrol dogs right now. We may in the future, as far as doing drugs and patrol work. But our patrol dogs do have smokers on them, which is so they can smell out guns, for example. So we've had people throughout traffic stops, stuff like that, and the bush and our patrol dogs go through and track them down like that.
So, and again, without much knowledge of it, what's her job when she gets up in the morning? Like, do you just walk her around, take her somewhere? So she's like, you can't take her to a porch or whatever, but do you just like, you hear about something happening, or she just happens to be in a car, and or you take her on the street and she smells it on people? I don't know.
Yeah, so generally, we mark one on the radio, and we get a call, like somebody makes a traffic stop and they ask for a drug dog to respond. With the kind of the case law, with being able to make it in time for the summonses to be written and all that, sometimes we get a call where one in the city, if the other in the city, we don't make it in time. So we're more effective when we can kind of, if people give us the heads up, generally, we work a lot better with other units. Like, hey, we're going to be riding around Churchill today. Can you kind of follow behind us? That gives us the time to be there fast versus being a whole other in the city. Sometimes we just don't make the time. And like I said, we don't want to be part of that bad case law. So
Well, that's where we have to determine. This is an example from the other day. This is from Rico County Police Department, not ours. I got a dog call there. I was already on another call. The guy ran. So I'm at this other call for a long time. And when I cleared from that call, dispatcher's like, they still need you in Rico. I'm like, that can't be possible. It's a traffic stop. So I was like, can you check with them, please? So she does. Yes, they still need you. Okay, so I get there immediately. I'm like, what time is this traffic stop made? 50 minutes prior to me getting here. I was like, absolutely not. So we have to be careful too. Like, we could just walk up and not ask anything and run it, and now we're part of that case law. So we need to just be very careful with what we're doing.
if someone calls me and goes, hey, can you head over here? I'll start writing this summons with someone. Do it. You do it normal.
Yeah.
That's not a case law. We make it or we don't. The guy's just not going to stop being a drug dealer out of nowhere. You know what I mean? If we don't catch him today, it's not worth all
It's not worth my job, my house, it's not.
So, and that's where, it's, you have to have that standard when you do it, because like I said, there's bad things that happen when people try to cut corners like that, so.
Sorry.
I was going to ask if you had qualifications for being on the canine unit. I know some teams do, like you have to have kind of an auxiliary record before they'll give you like what is essentially, like a weapon with teeth. So,
Yeah, you could have a pretty good level of integrity, honestly. I mean, you could give anybody this dog and walk out there and be like, oh, she murdered. You know what I mean? You just can't take anybody being canine. It's not.
Yeah, so we have a tryout process and, all that stuff. And, from my standpoint, like, I want that person who I know has been around for a little bit and had court cases and has, that I can vouch for essentially, I mean, we go out to call alert and, we're calling the proper calls. We don't want somebody who's going to get to court and start stumbling over themselves and not
response dog who will alert, and then the response to that alert is a natural response for a dog is to bite or scratch. So we train them to sit as a response so that they don't scratch you or car, tear stuff up. Does that make
Right, I
sense?
just mean if she sits normally, you weren't, looking for drugs, you weren't out there to do that
Yeah.
job. But she
Well, that's what I'm trying to say is that people think that when the dog sits, that's what I just read as hurler. That's not it. Hurler is what I see that you won't see
Okay.
because I've been, I've trained for 7 years or, for 14 weeks of school and
So there's something more.
something more that we see that a regular person won't see. Or you might see it. But
It's similar
it's
to,
not the sit everybody
everyone knows
else
kind of like the Pavlov with the bells, he, rings the bells and makes the dogs rule. It's, the dogs have been conditioned to, they get into narcotic odors and they do things that they don't even know they're doing. They can't control it. The part they control is the response when they sit at the end and stare at source, but leading up to that, they've been conditioned through the school, that that's what they do when they get in that odor, and they can't help but do it.
and they're doing it because they want the toy. They want the toy.
Yeah.
So they're searching for that odor so they can play.
We get our paycheck, the dog's paycheck is getting the toy and play. So,
This is their whole paycheck. This is all
it's,
work.
yeah, it takes a lot of energy, and I mean, you have to, there's a lot of energy and just, being goofy with the dog. It's a good handler is going to be able to get down and be goofy with his dog and cheer, play with his dog, play with their dog, or, the dog's not going to be a very good dog, because that's their paycheck. Would you work if you didn't get paid? Why not?
Going off of that, can you just talk about where you get your dogs from?
So all over. Generally, there's there's vendors that they get their dogs from Europe, and they kind of follow their way to different vendors in the U.S. When we buy a dog, part of the purchase price is a 1-year guarantee for health, and also essentially a trade back. So, you get some of the vendors are like used car salesmen. So, they'll try to sell you limited if they can. So we test them out there, but sometimes the dog looks like a superstar at their building, but then we get them back to Richmond and they're just environmentally not sound, things like that. So, but we pay, $5,000 for a dog. But like I said, we get that ability to trade it back. But my dog was free, it was donated. We have another dog put through a school that family got a Belgian Malinois, and it was too much for them. And we tested it out, and it reached our standards to kind of go forward, and it's been going through school, and it's doing great. So, generally our patrol dogs, generally speaking, we pretty much get all of them from the vendors, just because there's some bite development stuff that goes on early on in their life that, but for drug dogs, we get them from all over.
I think we probably have time for like 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're probably going to do the demonstrations so people can get to class on that. So they probably see it more. So you can just call.
Do you do specific breeds of dogs, or can you do mutts?
But I don't care what the dog looks like, what what he or she looks like, breed. Generally certain breeds do better just because they have those drives. But you could take the ugliest pound dog in here. If it's gonna work and do its job, we'll take it. We don't care about pedigree or anything like that.
What would the procedure be with drug dogs if a state were to legalize marijuana? Can you train a scent out of the dog learning, or would you have to retire?
You could try to, but we wouldn't do that.
My argument would be, and we've kind of discussed this. My argument would be it's still legal federally, so maybe like that. But yeah, that's we've talked about that, just like what happens when it happens, if and when it happens. So I honestly, I need to call some people in Colorado and figure out if they scrap everything, or did they go under the hey, it's still legal federally.
But if they do legalize it federally, then all these dogs are done. So, only a set of dogs.
We're tired.
Yeah. Somebody else?
All right, so we can, I'll just
Do you want me to move?
Yeah, so generally, so I have no, y'all can stay in line with us, so I'll explain. So when we run things on the street, generally, we try, so if we're running people in the street, if at all possible, we try to have other people standing in line with them, so it's just an extra proof, well, hey, the dog didn't alert the other two people in line, it alerted on you. So obviously, you have less argument. So people try to say, oh, the dog you made the dog alert and sit on me and all that stuff. So it's just, we add a little extra thing when possible. New thing. It's good for usage. So, yeah. Just stand kind of like.
If you want to get in the middle, so kind of give them an idea of how they're, actually, go to the end, just to give them an idea. So, did you already, I'm sorry, did you just say this? You may have just said this, and if you did, please tell me. So on the street, we'll put like an officer, a suspect, subject, whatever, an officer. So there's like a negative, like we know that person doesn't have drugs. She's supposed to run past him. You know what I'm saying? That makes sense?
Professor Crane looks a little nervous.
You might have to go.
Gotta go. Actually, you know what? Go in the middle. I don't know if they're going to be able to see it anyway, but okay, bring the work. Right? Bring the work. Okay. So.
Good job,
I don't know if you guys can see all that. So the end result obviously is good. It's not going to work. So that's what people try to argue on the street or in court. She can sit wherever she wants.
What is it that you see that tells you? Can you
The different, the change in like change behavior, will change, right? So it's like they can close their mouths, they'll sniff more frantically. Their ears will go back. Their whole behavior changes. And then I wish somebody had a dog. I don't know. Somebody covered in like dog hair or something like that.
Isn't it important that when the dog is hitting, the dog is not, the response is a change in its natural part, but it's not something you can talk about. It's just what they do,
It's natural, right? Yep.
So they can't fake it. They couldn't fake that part of it.
Right,
if they
right.
tried.
It's because of the training, because they're excited to come,
They're
but they're calm.
conditioned, yeah, they're so conditioned to,
So now people, so she's been around, and she might not do with you, not a lot of dog odor, but there's a difference between what she did there and then general interest. So, and it's our job to be able to read that. Like, she could go up and start sniffing you a lot, but it's my job to be able to tell the difference between, oh, you have dogs, like, I'll ask people on the street, do you have dogs? Yeah. And then,
It happens in certification, like, so we run a lot of people in certification. There's always that person in certification that dogs just love to check out. And you have to say, the dog's just checking them out, it's not actually alerting on narcotics. And, sometimes dogs just find that person, they just want to sniff all up and down before they go to next.
that's how much they love their toy, they won't let it go. Everybody got the room thing. So if you want to stand up there with them, real quick, and like I said, I don't know if she's going to do it, but it's my job to be able to like, oh, you have dogs. You have dogs. And read the difference between the general interest and the alert. So.